What's up, guys? So we're carrying on with the sort of deep dive into Goa-Trance. So something that's strikingly different about newer regular Psy-Trance as we probably know it and the more classic Goa-Trance is the kick and bass. As I can hear it, the kick generally tends to be a lot boomier and the bass tends to be a lot more of a sort of drone sound. So obviously there are those Goa tracks which have a more punchy bass line that is more reminiscent of the newer Psy-Trance. But I think a large portion of the classic Goa-Trance is more droney, more subby. So this is a track that I've come up with. Bear in mind, I'm not a Goa-Trance expert or anything like that. So this is just a couple of things that I've picked up in the kick and bass of Goa-Trance. And I want to show you guys a couple of tips and tricks on how to create those same sounds yourself. So one thing, like I said in the previous video, that is quite apparent with classic Goa-Trance is that you get these kind of evolving melodies and MIDI patterns. I think it's due to the fact that, the focus in music production was more on the sequencing, because in the early 90s, they obviously couldn't rely on some of the audio editing techniques that we have at our disposal nowadays. So what I like to do is I'd like to get into that mind frame. And say, for example, I'll set up a template with specific VSTs that I think will sort of achieve what I'm going for. Kind of envision the studio in the early 90s, if you were around that time, what synths you would have, and use Cubase or your DAW more as a sequencer and concentrate more on the MIDI patterns and the arrangements and the automation and those kinds of things. And I think that's going to get you a lot closer to that classic Goa-Trance sound because of that evolving melody and those kinds of things. So I kind of want to show you what I'm talking about here. As you can see, a lot of the elements I've left in their MIDI patterns. And what I've done is you can see it's kind of similar to, I think, the Liquid Soul video that I did where he has these melodies that kind of add on and evolve over time. I've done a similar thing here, where I created an original melody and sort of dumbed it down from there and then worked backwards. So hardware sequences are pretty cool, and they're actually quite easy to achieve this sort of thing, because often you'll create a MIDI pattern and assign it to a clip, similar to like Ableton's Live View, and then you just trigger which clip is playing at that time. So it breaks away from the sort of linearity of Cubase or that kind of DAW, but at the same time, it's just a bit of an insight into the sequencing and the arrangement that you kind of want to achieve when you're going for that kind of 90s classic Goa-Trance sound. So anyway, I digress. So this is the track as I've got it so far. So now listening to it in isolation, I can tell this kick is a little bit too clicky, but we can always change that the way that I've set this patch up. So here, let's open up a blank instance of TRK01 and let's initialize it and then just set both of these layers to synth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a boomy sound on one of the layers and like the transient sound on one of the other layers. You could even leave it as the fundamental sine wave that it is and just kind of affect the envelope over here. But I kind of want a bit of a sort of boof, boof kind of effect on the boomy part of the sound, because often when you listen to Goa, it has got that very kind of chesty, mid-range, goo, goo kind of kick drum. So let's try create that kind of sound on layer A, and we can create the kind of transient, like the very click on layer B. And that way we can then, crossfade how much punch and how much click we want. So it makes it a little bit easier to kind of alter the sound afterwards. Anyway, I set this amount up to about 21, and I turned the bend down to about under 10, anywhere between there. So that's basically like how much of that kind of chesty punch you want in the sound. And then the amount obviously accentuates that. So let me give you a quick reference here. Cool. So here we can head over to our envelope, and I want to set a bit of attack on this part because I want to obviously create a transient on layer B, but I don't want it to be too noticeable because I still want that kind of chesty punch. So I like to do this now before actually getting involved in layer B. Let's actually turn this one off here, and let's go back to the amp envelope, and then so here you can actually set this to, really carve out that space for the transient of layer B. Cool, that's starting to get there. It's got a nice sort of thumpy effect. And the decay bend and decay body over here, that obviously changes the curve of the decay setting. So let's head over to layer B and create a bit of a transient on this side here. So we obviously want to go amount all the way, not all the way up to 100%, but somewhere between 80 and 100%. And then duration we can turn down, obviously, because we want to create a faster accent. And then these you can just play around with to taste, I guess. This obviously accentuates the overall effect here like this. But let me play the audio so you can get a better reference. So the transient layer, that's up to taste. You can kind of experiment there, go wild. And, even once you've got a baseline going, it's cool to come back and, edit these and stuff. I think, like I said, one of the sort of key elements of classic Goa-Trance is the arrangement and the MIDI patterns and the melodies and the way that they use the synth sounds and stuff. And the sort of basic kick elements and the bass elements are not as prominent and not as focused on as today's Psy-Trance. And I think that's one of the things that make it quite inspiring to listen to as a producer, because it's a different approach to the stuff that we usually do. Anyway, so I'm just going to experiment here a little bit, create some bend, and turn this decay down just to get like a really, really plucky transient effect. But then we can always, you know, when we've got both, like I said, mix them in and out and see what works. So here we've got the crossfader that obviously crossfades between layer A and layer B. So if you want more transient this way, more boom this way. So this is a pretty cool little quick setting. So here what I like to do is also tune these both oscillators or both layers up and down to kind of find a good sort of key to work with the sort of rest of the track. And then I'll, you know, maybe set that back to 0 and edit the actual MIDI as I go. But I believe, you know, I found a good key there, so I'm not really going to do it, but I'm just going to show you guys the sort of difference that it can make. Even these kind of ever so slight fine tunes can just sound a little bit better. Even if it might not be in key with the bass or the rest of the track, it can sometimes just sound better. So, you know, I think in this example, go with the ear. You know, with kicks and stuff like that, I don't often stress making sure that they're in tune with the bass and all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, sue me. So once you've got the bass in, you can go back and edit like the amount of boominess and clickiness, like I said. But let's go into the bass and create a sound. I use Serum here, so obviously before you guys say, oh, but dude, they didn't have Serum in the 90s. I know, it's just a synth that is very user-friendly and has a visual approach. And I figured it's cool to start this series off with before diving into the emulations of all the hardware that the guys used to use and all that stuff. Anyway, the main difference that I've picked up with, like I said, with the bass in Goa and stuff like that, is that it's kind of more droney and more subby. So I'm actually going to show you guys how I created this. It's so simple that I'm not going to do it from scratch. I'm just going to talk you through each of the sort of elements in the bass. So here, I turned the sub on, and I guess you don't need to set it to direct out because I haven't assigned the filter here, so that's irrelevant. And I turned it 2 octaves down, and I set a bit of modulation here on the level to give it a bit of punch, but the idea is that you have the sub kind of ringing out as this low-end drone the whole time, and you're just adding a bit of punch with an oscillator and a bit of envelope action happening on the level over here. So the sub I detuned 2 octaves, and then I gave it a saw wave, which I detuned by 1, and then I did my regular envelope onto the filter to give it that kind of like punch. And then, so quickly, let's look at the MIDI pattern before I look at the last element in that sound. So it's a 16th MIDI pattern, but you'll notice here it overlays with the kick, but that's fine because I'm going to sidechain it using LFO tool. And I think this is quite an important factor to get that kind of like boomy, low end as the kick kind of rings out, you get that kind of droney sub from the sub oscillator. So you might not be hearing it like in full effect in my example, but it's something that I've definitely heard quite prevalent in classic Goa-Trance tracks. And I think it's due to the fact that a lot of these synths had a sub-osc built in that was already like one oscillator detuned, sending a sine wave directly out. And when the filter was applied, it wasn't getting as low as that fundamental of the sub to even filter it anyway. So I might not be understanding it, but I mean, I think that's kind of like why the sort of low sub drone became quite a prevalent sound, because of the synths that they had back then. Anyway, so here, what I also like to do to split the oscillators, for the sub and the saw, so that they sound, like they don't kind of get too muddy, is I use unison and then detune it ever so slightly. So it's two voices of unison and a little bit of detune. So that kind of like spreads them as opposed to the sub, which is in the center. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this, just this regular sound, and I'm going to show you the difference with unison on and unison off. I think it's like a quick and easy way of getting a fat sound without these kind of like wobbly, phasey kind of effects going on, because you're panning the two saws left and right while the sine is still solid center. So yeah, that's kind of what my ears are telling me. Anyway, so then on top of that, I put LFO tool. So obviously, again, they didn't have LFO tool in the early 90s, but sidechain compression was used. And so here I did it like a pattern like this on a 1/4, and the final effect was something like this. And then I also just put a simple EQ to roll off the top end of the bass line, just to give space for like those lower growly kind of synths and stuff that we're going to get into in the next episode. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed that. This is kind of what it sounds like. The kick doesn't sound like what it did in the original example, but you kind of get the picture as to how that plugin works. I did go through it in a previous video, so if you didn't quite get the idea, you might want to check that out. But, obviously for my Patreons, I am going to upload this preset. So, yeah. Awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. I'm going to post this bass and kick preset onto my Patreon for all my $5 supporters, so if you want to know what that's all about, head on over to the link that's going to be somewhere on the screen right now. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.